Thank you, wherever you are coming from, for joining us today and spending your breakfast or lunchtime with us. Special thanks to our wonderful sponsor, LinkSquares, our fantastic presenters today, Colleen Matthews and Ayush Dagar, who are going to talk about the contract risk revolution and how LinkSquares is transforming contract review. But first, this is our 55th event of the year, if you can believe it, and I want to know if it's your first one. Is it your first time joining us? Have you been with us before? Let me know in this poll that just popped up for you. So it looks like we've got a lot of repeat offenders here, diamond class frequent flyers, but also some first timers. So welcome, welcome, whatever your experience may be. We are so happy to have you here. All right. So with that, I will hand things over to Colleen to get us started. So Colleen, take it away.
All right, thanks, Kate. Hi, everyone. But I want to welcome you to today's session on contract risk, our contract risk revolution, as we're calling it. I'm thrilled that you're joining us today. We're going to tackle some of those most pressing challenges facing legal teams today regarding contract risk, covering some tactics around how teams are effectively identifying, assessing, managing contract risk. And then more specifically, discussing a little bit today about a recent feature that we came out with from LinkSquares. We're an AI-powered contract lifecycle management tool. We recently rolled out a new AI agent that is really aimed at helping in-house teams like yours identify contract risk across your entire lifecycle. All right, so just jumping in, before we dive in, let me introduce myself. I'm Colleen Matthews. I'm a senior product marketing manager at LinkSquares. We're an AI-powered tool for in-house legal teams to effectively manage contracts across the entire life cycle of your contracts. I focus on marketing some of our recent features, and we've seen a lot of movement in the AI space, specifically within the legal technology industry. So I've been involved in those rollouts as well. And then I'll pass it over to my colleague Ayush. He's going to be demoing us a little bit about our new feature today.
Absolutely. Great to meet everyone. My name is Ayush Dagar. I am a sales engineer here at LinkSquares. Been with LinkSquares for several months at this point, but also been in the CLM space. Joining Colleen today to talk about contract risk, what it means, how we can measure it. Also going to dive a little bit into how LinkSquares can potentially help the people in this call out with managing their own risk and analyzing their own contracts.
All right, so a little bit of what we're going to cover over the next 45 to an hour or so. So first off, we're going to start with just a little bit of an AI overview. I know a lot of folks today do have an understanding of the kind of larger revolution or evolution that is going on around AI, but I think it's always helpful to level set around some definitions and how we're seeing the AI space really shift, and in terms of how it shifts within the legal space today. Then we're going to dive a little bit deeper into assessing contractual risk in your organization. We know contract risk looks so different, probably for everyone on the call today. It probably has a different view than our own LinkSquares legal team has of it as well. So we offer this time to we want to hear from you to share how you're thinking about risk today, what's really keeping you up at night, what areas of concerns you're really facing when it comes to what's lurking in your contracts or challenges that you faced throughout negotiations as well. And then we're going to be exploring a little bit more about the role of CLM and more specifically AI in those efforts to really mitigate and reduce risk. But then we're also going to be giving you an overview, about 15 minutes or so, of our new LinkSquares Risk Scoring Agent. What do we mean by an AI agent, and how can it really help teams like yours today? So we do offer you to use the chat to ask some Q&A throughout the presentation. And then we've set some time aside at the end of the presentation as well to really have that interactive Q&A. So we do ask for any and all questions, comments that you have for us today. If we run out of time or don't have the answers handy between Ayush and myself, then we will be sure to follow up with you following the presentation and making sure that you have all of your answers around AI, CLM, risk scoring agent, all of those answers. So let's get started. Let's start with the basics. I find that many people over the years, I myself have been at LinkSquares for about 3 years, and we've seen a huge uptick in obviously artificial intelligence across the world and across so many industries today. And AI is becoming this catch-all term without maybe really having a level set understanding of what we're talking about. So artificial intelligence is really fundamentally about enabling computers to perform those tasks that have typically require a human in the loop or human intelligence to make those informed decisions about. But it's not just about that automation. AI is really learning from experience, understanding complex language patterns, or even visual patterns for some tools that employ visual identification, and then using those patterns and that knowledge to really make informed decisions. So if we're thinking about contract review or even just AI in contracting in general, you are that experienced attorney. You're reviewing that contract. You're drawing on those years of experience, years of education. So you're able to spot maybe a problematic clause or understand the full context of what you're really tackling in that moment. And even in the topic that we're going to discuss today, using that knowledge and those patterns to really identify like what risk means to your organization. So now imagine those same capabilities, but being available through computer processing 24/7 and processing against hundreds of contracts, all of that pattern knowledge that the system's been trained on. So you can at least use that technology as a baseline to start from, and you don't have to get as caught in the manual reviews of reading through every contract and really using that cognitive load to figure out your next steps forward. So that's really what we're talking about today. This isn't about replacing your legal expertise. It's not about replacing lawyers in general. It's really about amplifying it. How can we give teams that are already strapped for resources as is some smarter tools that just speeds up that process a little bit, or even just gives you a better starting point, so that way you can really use your strategic knowledge and guidance to make those decisions about risk tolerance and weighing those with your business priorities as well. All right. So here's where it gets interesting is when we break it down from what AI is to the different methodologies and fundamentals that are around it. This is just for a little bit of a primer. There's not going to be a test after this. But really what we're doing is we're witnessing this fundamental shift in artificial intelligence, even as this presentation is going on. It's a very rapidly moving and evolving environment right now. So first up, we've had this discriminative AI. Sometimes it's also called predictive AI. And this is really your traditional kind of analytics, what a lot of people have viewed artificial intelligence as over the last 20 years or so that it's been around. It's analyzing existing data that's already been available and then using, again, that knowledge and those pattern identifications to make future predictions. So within contracts and then specifically at LinkSquares, this predictive AI was really our bread and butter. We had built these machine learning algorithms specific to contract language and clauses to identify that language and where it shows up in contracts and then extract it so teams like yourself could really put your entire repository in there and then it would go through and pull out. I understand that this is a limitation of liability clause based on all these patterns of where this language has historically shown up, and then using that to extract your language so that way you're not reading through every contract. Then over the last 2 years or so, we really saw this move towards generative AI. So this is what everyone's really been talking about and what you might be using depending on your company policies around like a ChatGPT or an AI chatbot. Similarly, you're really creating net new content by a simple human prompt that you might be putting in. So it might be something like create me a recipe to host 7 people over tonight, or specific to contract management, really using it to draft new contract language, maybe modify something existing. We have generative AI capabilities within the LinkSquares platform today. I think about the example that we have when drafting and editing contracts in our Word add-in. We have this AI assist feature that you can go in and similarly just enter a prompt into to really interrogate the document, what changes were made by the counterparty since the last time that we had this, just items like that, and it would generate that response back to you. Now, a big trend that we're going to be seeing leading into 2025, and that I would imagine will continue over the year and into the future, is agentic AI. So this is where we're at right now. It's a big game-changing kind of new shift in AI. It doesn't just respond to prompts. It is really perceiving that full context of anything that it's dealing with, but contracts specifically. So unlike generative AI, that's just responding to those specific prompts, agentic AI can really perceive and decide and act either completely on its own in an autonomous way or with a little bit more of that human intervention. So that's why we call it a risk scoring agent, is you have this ability, we'll get into it a little bit later, but to really define what risk means to your organization, define those profiles up front. And then once that's built out, you can really just run that against either your contracts that you're negotiating or your contracts that are maybe hidden in your repository. All right. So diving into what we're really here today to talk about contract risk. So at its core, contract risk is really just that potential for loss or any negative outcome relating to maybe terms or clauses and conditions that you've agreed within your contract, or maybe that you're about to agree on if you're going through negotiations, or it could also mean obviously the failure of either party to really comply with those terms that were set out. I will caveat this with saying we understand that that's number one, a very generic definition of contract risk, because it really is difficult to define that because it really varies greatly by organization. There's really no silver bullet when it comes to defining that contract risk across your organization. We know that your businesses have different products, you have different goals, you have different strategies, and therefore your risk tolerance and profiles really differ. So we really wanted to build a way that you could have a say in defining what that contract risk means to you. And that's why a lot of traditional risk features that we've seen across the market might not have gotten a ton of adoption, or they've really fallen flat because they're just applying that generic risk framework that doesn't actually reflect your business priorities. So that was definitely a big consideration that we were thinking about as we were building out this risk scoring agent feature and what it could look like for our customer base. And that's really the beauty of an AI powered approach, is it can be trained against what you're outlining is specific to your organization and how you want to think about it and how you want to think about it across different agreement types. And it could totally differ from LinkSquares' position to In-House Connect's position, giving you that flexibility to really dictate to the system what you're looking for. Ayush, anything else you want to add just around the idea of contract risk in general, what you've seen about talking to some of our prospects and customers on the topic?
Yeah, absolutely. I think treating contract risk with nuance is absolutely critical. Not only is your risk tolerance going to vary based on which industry you're in, based on whether you're doing business in the public sector, the private sector, it's also going to vary within your own business, right? So your commercial contracts versus your procurement contracts would have entirely different risk tolerances. You would want different things for those two types of agreements. So being able to apply contract risk in a nuanced way is what would make it useful in the first place at all, right? Having a generic framework applied to all your agreements might just end up giving you meaningless data.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. And even in talking with our legal team and exploring this feature, maybe how they're going to use it as well. But I think the real power of a tool also that is coming in and helping you really quantify what your risk is also then the ability to really report out on the impact that your team is having around risk reduction efforts, maybe showing how you bump that down in negotiations from version to version, getting yourself a better position, or even thereby evaluating contracts that have already been executed and catching some of those risky areas ahead of renewal. I think having metrics like that to really report out to your larger organization and how you're impacting those business strategies and making sure you're in line with what the business needs overall is super, super impactful. And then additionally, it also just helps from a perspective of narrowing down really where you need to focus. There's so much noise in today's day to day. Like, where am I going to have the biggest impact? That is way more true than even for legal teams today. And I know everyone is really stretched for time and for resources. So even just having an initial tool to again come in, say, I'm going to evaluate this against what you're telling me to. This is me, the system talking, really just helping you to narrow down like where you should initially start to focus. All right. So now for the interactive portion. So before we go any further, I really want to hear from you. This is where the rubber meets the road. Let's talk about really specific real world challenges that you're experiencing today. So if you could use the chat and just outline like what does contract risk really look like for you and your organization? And are there any terms specifically that you're concerned about, or maybe even any components of your life cycle, your contract life cycle that you're really concerned about? Feel free to throw those in the chat. Renewals, yes.
We know you have problems, people. We know they exist.
Redlining
Yep.
third party paper. Thank you, Shy. Insurance risk, yep. Is it data protection? Is it keeping up with some of the new tariffs and regulatory changes that have been going out? Consistent language and standards. Yeah, these are all super applicable and we're hearing them in the day-to-day a ton. Indemnity, yep. Awesome. Well, if you don't want to interact on that one, feel free to do it on this one. And then we also have a poll for you. But do you have a way to understand that risk today? Maybe you're aware of what you're concerned about, but do you really have any way to identify it today? Totally judgment-free zone, automating notifications to a contract owner. Yep, these are all great. Yep, and we just popped a poll up, but on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being low, 10 being high, how would you rate your organization's risk exposure today?
Some risky business going on in here, judging by the results of these polls.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because while this does really vary across the board, I'm not seeing anyone that has one being super, super low because obviously there's always going to be that area that is concerned. But all right,
We have a 10. We have a 10 though.
no nines though. That's good. But yeah, that's what we hear from legal teams constantly. Like we know that we have it. We just don't have a really systematic way to identify it, quantify it, and then really prioritize what needs to happen to put yourself in a better position. And that uncertainty, not knowing the risks that are lurking in your contract portfolio after execution, or maybe not having a good way to have a baseline of maybe some of those deals that you are spending a lot of time in redlining up front, but maybe you don't need to. Maybe you should be spending your focus on some of the other ones are all definitely fair. All right. Thank you for the participation. But this is really because risk is inherent in any contract, and in most cases, it can't be avoided. It can really only be minimized. And we totally understand that a lot of these risks that we see fall across several of these buckets. So, legal risk, talking about anything around compliance or regulatory violations, regulatory exposure. Think about GDPR requirements missing from your vendor agreements. The cost here isn't just financial, it is concern around those regulatory penalties or litigation exposure. But then moving on to financial, obviously, anything that's impacting your bottom line or that could result in unexpected costs, revenue loss, etc., is always top of mind for organizations. Some examples of that: unlimited liability clauses exposing you to uncapped damages, or maybe you're seeing payment terms that have really gnarly late fees or penalties. Anything regarding your financials is definitely always super concerning and an area that you want to be paying attention to as you're going through your contracts. But there's also items around in today's environment, security risks, concerns around those data protection or your cybersecurity stance. I know a lot of folks have that concern around data retention policies, making sure that you're responding to those in an appropriate way. And then finally, even operational risks, any of those terms that your organization had previously committed to, and now you're just operationally at a point that you can't meet them anymore. How are you just getting a baseline understanding of what there is out there that you had committed to, and maybe what needs to be revisited as time has gone on? So this is really why we have been prioritizing delivering a way to have a systematic approach to identifying and prioritizing those risks across your entire contract lifecycle, because they obviously come in many shapes and sizes, and this is obviously not all exhaustive. But we've really seen when it comes to actually assessing risk, and again, this might even be you going through it without having a CLM tool in place. Maybe it is all very manual, but these challenges are really broken into your pre-signature drafting areas and then also your post-signature side. So first up, having really manual contract reviews. Obviously, like we're a contract lifecycle management tool, so that's always been a priority of ours, risk regardless, is to speed some of those up. But when it comes to risk in particular, that manual component really does add to this. We're all human. We only have so many hours in a day. I think the mix of manual contract reviews and then also having that limited review time, maybe trying to get your business stakeholders the contracts that they need as soon as they can, does really impact your ability to maybe be able to finally comb through all those contracts and make sure that you're getting the preferred positions across the entire negotiation period. There's also the element that it's highly dependent on individual expertise. So maybe you're on a larger legal team. So maybe it's not so much a matter of I don't have enough time or hours in the day, but maybe it's I know what I know, but then my colleague might have a different stance on it. So how are we balancing that, making sure that there's that consistent evaluation and assessment across the board? And all this really just does result in a lot of time just spent on the reviews. Even then, no matter how many hours you're spending on it, still always that potential of missing something that could have been important for your organization. It is time, a limited amount of time, an inability to then focus on more strategic initiatives. So that's really something that we set out to as well in the development of LinkSquares in general, but then specifically with our risk scoring agent. Shifting over to that post-signature side, having thousands of agreements within your contract portfolio that you've agreed to, thousands of legacy contracts like in your repository. Maybe they're all lock scan, maybe you don't know quite what's in them. It's difficult to kind of get a grasp on what's lurking in there. We find that there's a lot of hidden liabilities or unfavorable terms that might have been buried down. Maybe you inherited this contract repository as you became a new GC or a new legal team member. How do you have a way to systematically identify what's what's in there and then be able to get ahead of it ahead of time for renewal. If you don't, it could trigger those costly incidents. You could violate some of those compliance or regulatory measures. There's no real good way to identify those until they come up, and then you're focusing on them piece by piece instead of a larger way. So long processes take a lot of time. That's why we're setting out to help you speed those up. I won't spend too much time here. Again, I'm sure a lot of you utilize these in your day to day. But I don't want to come at this from a view that we all have that technology in place. So just focusing on the fundamental framework of what effective contract risk management could look like for organizations. First up, obviously, to understand how to mitigate it, you have to identify it first. So regular contract audits, establishing what your organization's risk profile even is, making sure that you're aligned across your business stakeholders, and just having a good understanding or internal playbook of how you want to tackle that. Understanding parts of that contract management process that introduce risk. Is that in your workflow process as you're going through approvals and negotiations on the pre-signature side? Or is it that your contracts aren't even in one centralized spot? I think sometimes it's helpful to identify, number one, what that risk looks like to you, and then number two, where is it really showing up within your processes? Once that's all nailed down, risk should be assessed obviously early and often if you're able to, before you've even gotten to that signature stage. But then once it is executed agreements, or again, maybe you're in that position where you're inheriting the repository, regularly auditing those contracts, establishing what terms and language you can really prioritize to start getting a handle on, and then really weighing that potential risk with your strategic business needs as well. Speaking with our VP of legal around this topic in general, he brought up the good point. Maybe sometimes you're coming in and again, you're seeing these sales contracts and you're like, oh, this is not how I would be agreeing. And he was using the example of sometimes you have to pick and choose those battles and really maintain that relationship with sales and the larger business as well. So making sure that everyone's just on the same page there, ultimately be able to mitigate, never fully vanquish, but hopefully reduce, taking those steps to reduce it where possible, establishing repeatable processes, whether you're drafting, establishing those templates, or even setting up clause libraries that you can all centrally pull from, and then regularly reviewing agreements ahead of key dates like renewals, terminations, etc., and adjusting that language as needed. So at LinkSquares, before we dive into the feature, just to level set some of the terminology that we're going to be using, LinkSquares is an AI-powered contract lifecycle management tool. And then we also have 3 distinctive sections to help you fully execute your contract from end to end. So first up is in Finalize. That's our pre-signature drafting tool. You can do all of your drafting from here. You can set up self-serve templates to make sure that your organization is able to give you as much of that information you need to successfully get started with contracts through those templates. We allow you to manage your clauses through a clause library and save and reuse that preferred language, all that great stuff. Version controlling. We do have an e-signature solution, LinkSquares Sign, get you to signature, or we integrate with DocuSign and Adobe Sign as well. And then when everything is signed and we're all set, those do flow into our AI-powered repository Analyze. So this is where we store all the contracts, make sure you know everything is centrally located, and then we run that AI over there so you can pull out your key renewals and dates, pull out your clauses through reporting, and really establish where you can get involved ahead of renewal as well. So all that's to say is our risk scoring agent runs across this entire contract lifecycle. I'm going to shortly pass it to Ayush to do the demo of it. But ahead of that, Ayush, anything that you want to add around LinkSquares?
Yeah, absolutely. So being a CLM, of course, we do manage the contract from its initial creation, signature, and finally storage. Our scoring feature exists on both sides of the contract, both while it's getting drafted and once it's finally executed, because we know risk mitigation is critical in that drafting portion, and then analyzing your existing agreements is also really important as a use case for managing your own risk.
Great, thank you. All right, so why we're all here today, the LinkSquares Risk Scoring Agent. So this is our newest feature. We rolled it out last week. It is that agentic AI application within our entire end-to-end CLM. This is really not just another contract analysis tool. It really is an intelligent agent that is going to allow you to proactively manage that risk, no matter where you're utilizing it within that pre-signature finalize tool or that post-signature repository analyze. And the idea is to really give you the the ability to customize what risk means to your business. We know there's no silver bullet. We do not know how to define risk as it refers to your company or even how you control it from contract to contract. But we wanted to establish a way to give you an understanding of what that contract risk is and how it's showing up across your portfolio and your business. So the benefits of really, we want to give you the ability to understand it ahead of signature, see where you could maybe reduce that even ahead of locking into it, and then also quantifying that risk on the legacy side of it after execution. So we do this through the ability to create your risk criteria as shown here. Again, not going to spend too much time here just given the time constraint today, but I did just want to call out, give it a quick name, you give it a quick definition, really what is the AI looking to flag, and then weighting it. So how important it is to you and your organization. And then each of those risks then is also applied based on agreement type. So one specific clause or language that you're looking for, in this example, we have that data breach notification. Maybe that's a little bit more important on your vendor agreements than it is in a master services agreement or vice versa. So giving you a little bit of a say of where that should be applied and how much it matters depending on the scenario. This can also be further applied based on tags. So just another way for you to granularly apply where you're using that technology. Within Finalize, I think my favorite use case around here is really highlighting that risk from version to version, quantifying the risk reduction efforts that you've done. You can get the risk assessments available on demand as you're running the score and identifying those top few risks. And then I've also called out, you can download that full risk report, full Excel explanation of why the system made the decisions that it did. Within Analyze, really the ability to understand your organization's entire risk exposure for those active contracts, utilizing those scores to identify where you should prioritize efforts, what's coming up for renewal, what has a high risk score versus what doesn't, see how it's being scored, and to just get that explanation of how the system is scoring it so that way you have that transparency and better understanding of what the system is doing with your contracts. Just leaving this here, we have a few of our customers that are on the risk scoring agent today or participated within our beta program, really just calling out the time savings, the efficiency that customers like yourself are seeing today. We know that these, depending on contract, it could take hours, it could take several hours a week. This tool really giving the ability to have that visibility in active negotiations as well as those legacy contracts has really empowered some of our customers to even just proactively manage risk. Last thing you'll hear from me before I pass it over to Ayush is these are just a few of the use cases that we've been seeing the tool be used for today. So the ability to prepare for mergers and acquisitions, really accelerate that due diligence, just understand either where you want to start to be able to put yourself in a better position for your negotiations, or maybe you're the buyer and trying to understand what's going on in that portfolio you might end up inheriting. This is really important today, market agility, the ability to rapidly respond to those market events like tariff changes or regulatory shifts. You could set up a risk profile central to those to really identify what contracts are affected by those, an action plan for really how you're going to tackle that. And then I was using this throughout the presentation, but really that area of if you're a new legal team member or maybe even in the event of, again, inheriting that portfolio, previously there was really no way to handle that risk. You just had to take it how it came to you and to develop a plan of action going forward. So our hope is this risk scoring agent would really give you an area for you to level set and understand where you need to prioritize some of those efforts. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Ayush so we can see this tool in action, and we'll address those following the demo.
Fantastic. So I'm going to start us out in what we call our risk areas to show you a little under the hood about how risk is defined with LinkSquares Risk Scoring. These risk areas up on my screen right now, each row is its own individual area. I can see I have one here for price lock. This price lock risk area is defined strictly for just my sales agreements, and within that, just my master agreements. The definition is what's really driving the AI here. We've told the AI that I don't want any contracts in which there's a non-standard price lock, and that pricing is then locked for over a year. You then give each of your areas a weight. This weight is also critical because it will inform the final risk score that the AI will generate. Ultimately, the AI is going to be generating a single normalized score, which we'll take a look at in just a second. And that score is going to be influenced by all the different risk areas that you have defined and the weights that you've given them. The system's going to come with some risk areas out of the box, but there is total flexibility in editing any of these risk areas. So looking at price lock here, you go ahead and say, I want to define this in a different way, or maybe I want to change the weight down to a 6. It's not as important as a 7. You also have the ability to just net delete any of these, add completely new risks that might be particular to your business. Lots of flexibility in how we configure things. One other critical call out here is really that ability to treat risk with nuance. So on my screen, I mostly have risk categories or areas here for my sales agreements, my master agreements. If I tab over, I can see I have a different set of risk areas for my procurement contracts. Looking at price lock again, I've gone ahead and defined it as saying pricing is not locked. We would find that risky in our own procurement contracts because the vendor may increase the price on us. Given that a score of 5. And with these different use cases, different types of contracts, different agreements coming into the system are going to be given different risk scores based on what type of agreement that is and what the exact use case might be. Risk can be used both in the pre-signature module and the post-signature module. Start us out looking at the pre-signature side of things. Tabbing over up on my screen now, there is a vendor contract that I have ingested into the LinkSquares finalized system. Finalize, of course, is our pre-signature module. So this is where any net new agreements to be redlined, negotiated, and finally signed would initially enter the system here. Once the agreement has gotten into the system, users can then generate a risk score around that agreement and also a summary of that score. So for this particular vendor contract, I can see that the AI has gone ahead and scored this as a 46 out of 100 and given me a summary, essentially justifying that score. The AI is treating the contract here very holistically. It's going to be reading the entire contract, applying all the risk areas that we had defined, and then generating the summary of the 3 most important points from the agreement itself, while making direct references to the agreement, such as it calling out section 7.1 as having auto renewal within it and flagging that as being risky. You also have the ability to generate a full risk score. This here is seen at the bottom of the screen. Only have one version of the contract here, but as things get redlined, contracts go back and forth, you'd be generating more versions and you can generate risk scores for each of those versions. One common use case that we've heard as feedback from our existing customer base is that ability to intake third-party papers, generate a risk score on them, see that, okay, this is a 46, and as the negotiations go on, using the risk categories and the risk scores as a guiding beacon to help flow the negotiations towards more favorable terms. So you might say, this is a 46, we're going to shoot to get this down below a 35, and you can run the risk scores on each version to see, okay, finally we've gotten down, negotiated down to something like score in the mid 30s, we're happy with this, and it's ready to go and get signed. Risk scores are also generated in the contract repository. Another common use case I think Colleen had highlighted is something like for M&A. If you want to generate a risk score for all your agreements, you'd be able to say, okay, we're going to take just the agreements where the risk score is over 50 and have our outside counsel take a second look at them. Rather than having to send them 1,000 contracts, you might be able to cut that down all the way to something like 500. I can see I have a pretty wide range of different risk scores generated here. Everything as high as 74, and even risk scores as low as 28. On the repository side of things, if we click into any of these agreements, such as this AlphaZap master agreement that I have, I can see the full risk report in app. This is a procurement contract, so we're looking for price locking. The AI does treat all the contracts with nuance, so it's not a very black and white system, right? The nice advantage of AI compared to normal computer models is that it's a little deeper than zeros and ones and will treat its analysis of your agreements with some level of nuance. With price lock here, it points out the fact that price lock is not explicitly mentioned and gives it a moderate risk of a 4 rather than a full-blown heavy weighted risk. Each of the risk areas are going to have their own sort of summary definition that will also make references directly to different sections of the contract, so you can easily go and reference the original language to see exactly what was being discussed. The way the risk score actually works here is the AI will generate an individual score for each of the areas that you've defined. On the right-hand side here, you can see it goes 4, 5, 2, so on and so forth. It will then go and sum all of these scores up. And based on the total risk weights that you had given it, finally generate a normalized score out of 100. This is why that weighting piece of things is really critical, because it'll actually very deeply and profoundly influence the final risk score that is being generated. Very similar kind of report for a contract that generates a relatively low risk here. You can see the numbers have dropped off. This went from a 4 to a 2. And every single category, just like before, is going to be defined individually, row by row, defining exactly what the risk might be. All right, Colleen, I think we're probably ready to open up to a handful of questions.
All right, great. Thank you. I am also seeing a few in the chat, or Kate, if you want to read them off. But I think
Yeah.
the first one, oh yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, you go ahead. If you have the first one locked and loaded, you go for it.
All right, perfect. So one question was, is there a recommended range for where your risk scoring should land?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have our scores relatively normalized here. So you can treat it as being kind of like a bell curve. So you can take the first third, the middle third, and the last third and create categories as low, medium, high for yourself. Totally flexible, up to you. But because the score here is normalized, it's been mathematically determined so that you have all your contracts existing on kind of a bell curve, such that if you want to break things up into 3 categories, say 1 to 30 is low, 30 to 70 is medium, and 70 and above is high, that would be a meaningful thing to represent statistically because of the way we do the normalizing of the final score generated.
Yeah, completely agree. Thank you. Maybe at LinkSquares, again, that 1 to 30, we're not super concerned about it. Maybe that means we're going to spend less time on the negotiation period or not prioritize it as much for review versus those different phases. But definitely for customers to define what that means for their organization and how they want to go about determining that. Another question I saw coming in was, is it possible to generate a report not on the overall score, but on particular risk tags or risk areas that are flagged as
Yeah,
hot?
yeah, it's a great question. So the way that LinkSquares works here is we do a lot of our organizing based on what we call tags. So this procurement and sales, differentiating between these two kind of contracts is really being driven by tags. Tags are very flexible. They don't have to necessarily be such broad categories as all your commercial agreements versus all your procurement agreements. You can have ad hoc tags created to subset a certain set of contracts that you want to analyze independently. So you could create something like a room, a project room, create a tag called Project X, just have a subset of contracts tagged with that, and then create risk areas to just analyze those subset of contracts for those really important high critical pieces that you're looking at. In the end, you would generate the same kind of report with the different risk areas that you have specified, the ones that you want to specifically focus on. Absolutely not. So we are well aware that something like risk scoring is something you want to approach strategically, tactically, and with care and attention. So we have a lot of robust permissioning here such that certain users would be able to actually generate the risk scores. Different subset of users might be able to view the reports and even treat things with nuance where maybe you want certain users seeing risk just in the pre-signature, but not for your signed agreements. Or maybe you want them to actually have access to the final number just for their own organization, but you don't want them seeing the full report as such. So we can treat different users, give them different permission sets so they have access to different things.
Great. Seeing one as well, but what's the process to train this for what your preferences are? So, for example, if you want Virginia to be the governing law or 24 hours for breach notification. So that would really be the creation of that new risk profile and just defining out, maybe show how you would do it for the Virginia for governing law example.
Yeah, absolutely. So we can add new risk categories as we see fit. So I can call this misspelled Virginia here, Virginia governing law. I would then go and define which types of agreements I want this category to apply to. I'm going to stick with my master agreements. And then utilizing the tags, we can pare it down to apply it to just a subset of particular agreements. Maybe I only particularly care about this for my IT agreements, run this just on my IT agreements and define the risk as being governing law is not Virginia. That's really all the AI needs here. It's going to take this little snippet that you gave it and go off to the races, analyzing the contract holistically, determining whether or not the governing law is Virginia. You then go ahead and weight it, which would then impact what that finalized score is. So if we give it a really low weight here, something like a 1, the governing law ends up being, let's say, Maryland, then it's not going to actually impact that end score very significantly. Obviously, something like a 9 here will impact it a lot more. In terms of actually determining what your weights should be, what your different risk areas should be, I think one best practice we've seen emerge since the release of this product is just get a kind of, you could think of it in terms of like how AI is trained today, AI models are, you can have a sort of training set, a smaller subset of contracts that you know really well. you would consider low risk, three of which you're not super happy with, had a very long back and forth negotiation cycle. You wish you could get rid of them, but you have them. And then you'd be able to define your risk categories, run them on those subset of five. And what you'd really be looking for is looking for those two contracts to score below something like 20, and for those three high risky contracts to score above 80. And then you can be confident that, okay, the areas and the weights that I've defined work really well on this subset of contracts. Let's go ahead and run it over our hundreds or even thousands of agreements to then give us a much more deep understanding of our overall contracts.
Great, thank you. I think one last one that I'm seeing in the chat is, can you generate risk scores for each topic based on divergence of a pre-approved template, such as a legal team approved MSA?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. The definition has lots of flexibility in what you input. There is totally the possibility for you to give it something like your standard language and tell the AI a prompt, please define the risk score based on divergence from, and then you paste in your language. Because the AI model behind the tooling here is a large language model, it has very general capabilities and will understand that level of nuance to be able to compare different contract sections to your pre-existing defined approved clauses. Yeah, that's a great question, I think from Lyndon. So we have a couple places we're actually generating summaries. This summary here is really just focused around that risk summary. Unfortunately, it's not possible to get a more succinct version of this particular risk summary. We do generate other summaries within the system. We have other AI functionality. Within our Word integration, in fact, within our app here as well, we have something that we call our abstract. The abstract is meant to be a holistic summary, and it will generate a single sentence overview of what the contract is, as well as extracting key points. This AI here isn't focused on risk per se. It's more focused to be that kind of summary tool.
Can you have the AI clearly point out that while maybe that overall risk score is low, say like 35, would, like, if there are like 3 10s within that score?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's exactly what this summary here is doing. It's going to be highlighting the top risks within the contract. So if you have a low score, but there is a 10 in there, then it's going to go ahead and put that as one of the bullet points to highlight that fact for you.
Great. All right, Kate, that is all that I'm seeing within the chat right now, but we can definitely follow up with anybody following the presentation as well.
Definitely. I actually have a question. So I imagine that I can see that you can tag different types of contracts and stuff. Does it ever do anything predictive? So if you load something in, will it ever say, this looks like a tech contract and I will apply your filters for that? Does it do anything like that?
Yeah, so the way the contracts are organized is going to be by workflow. So
Okay.
typically what we have is our customers will set up different workflows based on those different use cases. So you'll have maybe a workflow for your software agreements. We can have within a particular workflow sort of dynamic approvals, different chains, orders created, different signing processes based on exactly what the use case is. So if you have a general vendor contract intake form, users can specify, okay, this is a hardware, we're buying a server maybe, or we're buying software, maybe it's a lease, we're buying property. And we can have different risk scores generating based on user input dynamically such.
Very cool. Ayush and Colleen, this was really awesome. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. And thank you to everyone who attended. We hope to see you at more of our events very soon. We've got 2 CLEs next week, so go sign up for those. And we also have several in-person events next week. Shai is doing the West Coast swing, as he calls it. He's going to be in San Francisco on Tuesday. He's going to be in San Diego on Wednesday and Los Angeles on Thursday. So please don't make him do all of that traveling in vain. Show up if you're in the area. Go say hi to him in person. I can tell you it's very fun to meet Shai in person, so I recommend it. So if you're in LA, San Diego, or San Francisco, go check out the in-person events and go sign up for those. And Colleen, Ayush, anything at the end that you would like to say before we let everybody go?
We had additional resources linked within the deck as well. I think the team will send that out following. No, just really thank you for attending today. Thanks for spending the last hour with us. We really appreciate it.
Legal tech is an exciting space, lots of interesting work being done across the industry and here at LinkSquares as well.
Thank you so much, everybody. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we will see you at the next one.